I look at all of the news headlines and the cadence of headlines, probably starting early June through to now, but you've got the data. So summarize the scale of what's happening in the industry right now versus prior years where we saw heavy layoffs as well.
Yeah, that's right. So according to Layoffs.fyi, we've tracked now 126,000 tech employees laid off so far in 2024. The good news, that's actually down 42% from the same time last year. And if you look at the quarter-on-quarter trends, tech layoffs have generally been leveling off since their peak in Q1 of 2023. Of course, it has spiked a little bit in the past couple of weeks. The bad news, 2024 is still on pace to have more layoffs than any other year this decade, except for 2023. And of course, it's all a small comfort if you're one of those 126,000 people laid off.
We've just illustrated that point, Roger, with a chart which was showing your data at Layoffs.fyi. And then here's the point that I was making. Those are big names, right? Intel, Tesla, SAP in Germany. Cisco, we just broke that reporting on and the stock move. AI. So what your data may or may not track is there a reallocation of resource to new jobs if the justification is AI?
That's definitely what we're seeing in a lot of the companies' announcements for the layoffs, that tech companies are increasingly citing AI as the reason. For example, earlier this week, Dell cut thousands of employees as part of a sales team reorg that included creating a new team focused on AI sales. And then early this year, Intuit laid off 1,800 employees and cited that they're doing so they can invest and make more hires to help build AI into its tax prep software. And it is definitely an allocation of resources. Building AI is expensive. And according to salary tracker comprehensive.io, a senior AI engineer in the Bay Area earns $208,000 per year just in base salary. And that's 16% more than a non-AI engineer and doesn't even include stock. So if you include stock options, equity, that pay package can total easily $500,000 to $1 million. Not to mention all the costs involved in infrastructure and hardware for building AI. So, the economic environment is still tight. Companies are finding that the only way to increase investment in AI is to cut costs elsewhere, and hence all the layoffs that we've been seeing.
Yeah, as Bloomberg Technology producer Marguerite Gallerini just reflected on in our team chat, maybe we're in the wrong line of work because it's lucrative if you are a computer scientist or software engineer in that space. There's a point you made a minute ago about 2024. We are in early August, and so let's try and extrapolate out. I look at the number of companies, for example, rather than the jobs in aggregate that are making these announcements. Have you a sense in the direction of travel for the remainder of the year?
Yeah, typically what we see is that Q1 and Q4 tend to be the biggest quarters for layoffs. That's often because companies do their annual budgeting around the end of year, which leads to those layoffs. Whereas the middle of the year, summer period that we're in right now, actually tends to be slower in terms of layoffs. Obviously, there's some notable exceptions that you see on the screen here. So unfortunately, I would expect that tech layoffs may pick up again as we head towards the end of the year and early next year, as companies take stock of their year, forecast into next year, do their annual budgeting, and decide whether they have the right team to move forward.
So let's do something else and do this in aggregate. You started tracking this data at the early days of the pandemic. How does this 4-year period or so compare to history? I think about the dot-com bubble, the global financial crisis. Are there ways to compare and contrast, Roger?
Yeah, it's tough to say. Layoffs at FYI, we started in 2020, so don't have the numbers from those two time periods. Although I will say the scale of the tech industry is just so much bigger than during the dot-com era or even the global financial crisis. So in aggregate numbers, I believe that this current period of layoffs is going to be the most that we've ever seen in the tech industry, just because the scale of the tech industry and the number of people working in this industry is so much higher now than in previous years.